says, we need somebody to take notes. Would anyone like to volunteer to take notes? And then he sits there for 15 minutes, silent, waiting for someone to say something. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep talking until someone says they will take notes. Well, that's, you would think we could leverage that technology for something like that. But no, I really do need I'm not looking for detailed stuff, just some, thank you, Paul.
Tell me what, if I'm not listening, if you just say, that's an action item, yeah, I will definitely. It's a Joe method.
Okay, so the two things, I guess, is if there's any significant discussion, just a sentence or two to summarize the discussion, and then I will, Francesca or I will say, take that down as an action item. Okay. Thank you, Paul. And, somebody, I guess I can just as well channel anyone in Jabber who comes on, but there's nobody remote in Jabber right now anyway. So this is the concise binary object representation, because we have to expand on first use. The Cbor working group. If that's not where you're headed today, get off the plane and let's get started. And Francesca is going to upload the slides from Karsten. He just sent an update. So, so if you are remote, even though I don't see anybody, wait a few minutes before you download the slides. And, all right. Well, while we're waiting for that, let's have the discussion that I was going to wait until the end. Let's have it now. Do we like having the conference calls, and do we want to continue them in the future? Hank raised it. Yeah, you use the microphone just in case somebody comes on remotely, and we'd like to have it recorded anyway. Karsten.
Yeah, Karsten Moorman. I don't like phone calls. I do like moving forward, so I have to make a compromise between these two positions. And I think so far we have handled them well. We have canceled them when it didn't make sense. But we had a jour fixe and knew that there was going to be another point where we can all synchronize in 2 weeks from now. So I think as long as we have active documents that we want to complete in a timely fashion, we should continue to do that.
Excellent. Hank?
Yeah, this is Hank actually. I second this notion, but have again to highlight that this is a standing conflict for me. I will never be able to attend.
Because of the date, or just because?
Because of the exact time and date. I know it's nice to have Core and Cbor interject. That somehow makes sense. But I have exactly bi-weekly intersected.
It does not need to be at the same time.
Yeah.
So let's find a time when you can join us.
That would be nice, because that is the reason why I've only joined once.
Yes.
And that was when the other one was cancelled. So
when we did the last one, when we set up the time for the last one, we had a short time to pick a date and get it announced.
Yeah.
We have time this time. Let's pick something that works.
Excellent.
Which one is that conflicted? Is it another working group, or you say?
It's another working group and another SDO, yes.
Ah, okay.
Just that time doesn't work for you. We will do a doodle and see what works for more people.
Yeah, and as a core chair, I think it's a nice idea to just alternate between Cbor and core, but that's just a personal point of view of me. So I would probably try to do that then.
Okay. Anyone else have comments? Does anyone object to continuing? Okay, then we will put out a doodle and pick a time and continue having these calls.
So let's start.
Yes.
Cbor, first of all, not well, which you should know by now. As a reminder, minutes are taken. Thanks, Paul. This meeting is recorded, and there are blue sheets going around. This is the agenda for today. So this is the introduction. Then Karsten will talk about CDDL status, what Cbor issues and status, and then tags. We have a bit of flex time. We see if we need it. So anything anybody wants to add or to the agenda?
So under miscellaneous, maybe we could quickly talk about how to get the RFC editor to strike Cbor from the must expand list.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I'll talk with them at some point.
Jim actually can ask.
So Jim can ask from the floor.
All right, this is Lawrence Lundblad. Just on the specification status, that will include some review of the open issues?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay. So,
And we have an AG now.
yes. So, status update of the working group. We've had 4 interims since IETF 2, as Barry was saying. The minutes and everything is in the data tracker, so you can read even if you were not there. I think, or we think, that these were really useful, and as we have decided, we continue to do them, maybe move the time, and we'll start a thread in the main list for that. About CDDL, the status is submitted to IESG for publication, is on the agenda for the telechat right after this IETF. There are some reviews, GenArt and Sectir reviews that I think Carsten will talk about, and there is Carsten needs to reply to Ayana as well. And for the Cbor-based document, we are version 4. It was updated during this past month. There are some issues left, and we'll get through them. And finally, the Cbor rate tag was finally adopted. So this was pending a review from Carsten that he has done to answer to Jim's review. So now that has been done, the document is adopted.
And Alexei, sorry, I have to look through Karsten, but the telechat really is on the 21st?
Yes, because of Thanksgiving,
Yes.
we moved it one day earlier. We're so dedicated. Otherwise, it would be like 5 weeks and
I was
nothing will be
surprised.
done till the end of the year.
I was
so.
expecting it would be the week after, so, yeah, all right,
Yeah, that was a special occasion.
all righty.
Yeah. So, Carsten.
Okay, so I am.
That's too big.
Too big?
Yeah, the,
Yeah, very good.
yeah.
No, not you.
Well, I'm too big too, but that's a different problem. So I always prefix my slides with some information that most people in the room are probably aware of what this working group is for, and so on. So I leave that in the slides so people who just get the slides know context. So just ignore the first few slides here. CDDL is the first item. And since IETF 102, we did a number of editorial things, moving appendices around, because there are more than 30 documents that actually reference this CDDL spec, and many of them reference specific appendices. We have tried to not move the appendices around. So Appendix G has been Appendix G for a couple of years now, and so that's the reason why we actually had gaps in the appendices, and finally we decided to move Appendix H to Appendix A, and the order doesn't make sense, but it has been stable, and I think we should stick with that. We aligned some terminology. In particular, there was a new segment that used the terminology can produce, where it better should have said matches. That's just the two ways of looking at a grammar. The grammar produces languages, or it matches an instance of the language, and we have been using matches throughout the document, so that's now aligned. There is new text in 353 about the map matching rules. The map matching is weird for the reason that the theoretical function of the grammar is to generate a sequence of symbols. But maps are not sequences. Maps don't have ordering. So there is a mismatch, an impedance mismatch between what the grammar does and what the actual construct in the language does. And this now has text to explain that this mismatch is there on a theoretical level, but you are very unlikely to hit it in a specification unless you really try to. And we recommend against trying to. So that's as far as we got. It would be much nicer if we could say, you never can hit it because we did this and this and this and this. But it's probably too hard to do that. Those people who were there in the 80s when SGML was standardized, that had a very similar problem, which was used ambiguous content models, I think. It's really been a while. And a woman actually wrote her habilitation thesis. That's the higher form of a German PhD thesis about this subject. So it's interesting, and I don't think we want to try to do that thesis work again in this context. So we know that there is something in the language that is not perfect, but as a specification writer, you really have to work to hit that problem. There have been other editorial clarifications, some typo fixes. That was 05, that went into the IETF last call. There have been two interesting comments after the working group last call, and I'm not entirely sure whether these comments really were about -05, because they both address parts of the text that we fixed to address the comments which hadn't been made yet. So one was that representation variants aren't covered. So for a while, the CDDL text kind of assumed it would be working with Cbor bis and not with the original 7049. Of course, we have to make sure that it works with the original one. We may want to put in some more technical clarification for 223 for the text about representation types, but I would really love to get some help about what is still unclear there, because to me it's clear, but of course as an author it's easy to say that. So if somebody would be volunteering to read Kevin's comment and the text in 223 and tell me where that doesn't cut it, that would be very useful. So just to quickly recap what the problem is. The problem is that Cbor often has multiple ways to represent a particular value. There's usually a preferred one, which is the shortest one. But when you actually write the CDDL, there are places in the CDDL where it actually puts the foot on the ground based on how the Cbor looks like. So the whole type system is grounded on Cbor representations. And this can be misunderstood as saying we actually mandate a specific representation, but that's not what is meant. What is meant is the type system started with types that collect all the values that are possible in a particular representation. But some of these values may actually have different preferred representations. So that's the underlying problem, and the current text is trying to say what I just said. Yeah, if somebody could volunteer to help me with that, I would be very happy. As an author, it's really hard to not read between the lines and see things that aren't there, that still have to be said. So is anybody in the room interested in helping me with that?
Paul Hoffman, I'm not volunteering. Why don't you ask the proposer of the problem?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Same thing about the map matching algorithm. Again, that's the thing I just had on the previous slide, the non-deterministic order. I can ask Kevin. So these were two working group comments coming after working plus call. I don't quite know how to classify them, but of course, we take these comments into account even if they don't quite fit into the process. There was a set of IANA questions. Where do we want to have the one registry we need, the control operators registry? So this is clearly a new registry page. IANA has this idea of categories of registry pages. And unfortunately, A226 doesn't tell us that we have to tell IANA what that category should be. So I always forget doing that. Should this be a new category for CDDL? Or should this be under the Cbor category? Given that there are JSON usages of CDDL, I'm not entirely sure that putting it under the Cbor category would be the right decision, but I'm open for input there.
Paul Hoffman, sorry I didn't see this before. I absolutely would have said do not put it under Cbor because there are plenty of other people who want it. The reason why categorization in IANA registries is good is that if somebody who's looking at a topic, because they don't actually put page breaks between the registries within a category, they tend to discover things. I don't think somebody looking at the Cbor spec, I mean, very few people looking at the Cbor's part of IANA, they're probably only looking for tag registries and such. I don't think them all of a sudden discovering CDDL is going to be like a brilliant thing for them. Whereas if it is separate, I believe that people will go, you know, who are actually scanning alphabetically will go like, what's CDDL? That's a better thing to discover.
Thank you. The other question was whether the registry itself should be ordered by name. And the pro is, of course, it's easier to find whether a name is taken, in particular because such tools in browsers are so hard to use. And the con is that by ordering them alphabetically, you lose the historical context. And that means, for instance, the 6 operators, NE, EQ, GE, LT, LE, and GG, would be spread over the registry instead of being kept in one place. So both of these arguments are weak enough that I don't know how to decide this. That's why I haven't answered the question yet. So if anybody has an opinion on this, I'd like to hear it.
Jim Schott, given that the registries are completely sortable, name is a good first step. So the default should be name, that's fine. But you can sort them by anything, any column you want.
Well, there's no other column except the specification.
And there's no registration date that you could sort on. So if they're sorted in the registry by,
Well, right, but I mean, you could sort by, specification, you could sort
it by name later. If the registry as presented to you is sorted by the order that they were registered, then somebody who wants to sort it by name can do that.
Yeah, this is Henk, and this is basically the answer. So I think I like the semantic grouping. Yeah, that's it.
So I suggest, this is Barry, I suggest responding to IANA by saying that they should have it sorted in the order that the entries came in unless the request specifies otherwise. And the request could say, suppose you set up a group of things and realized you missed one. It might be nice later to go in and say, register this and put it with those. So, yeah.
Nice, thank you. So the document is now in ISG processing, and there has been a sector review. And this being a specification language that will be used in the specification of protocols, the security considerations are mostly about telling those people who do the actual protocols what they have to consider. And the sector reviewer said, okay, why don't you point to RFC 3552, which tells you how to write security considerations in the first place? And that may be a bit redundant here in the IETF, but it's maybe not something that's totally lost to people outside the IETF who think about using Cbor.
Hello, I'm just going through my review that I never sent. And trying to decide how serious issues are. Some of the wording stuff I probably should send. One thing it would be worth pointing out in the document, you have a set of appendices, and some of them are normative and some of them informative. Can you please mark all the normative one? This appendix is normative at the beginning. Yes. I think this will help readers.
Very good.
Especially all the ABNF grammars, you know, there are several of them. So.
Yeah. The other sector comment was to include a normative reference to COSI. And yeah, I think most people in this room agree that's not the right thing to do. I understand where he comes from, because COSI defines its own mini CDDL.
Right. I think your answer was sufficient.
Good, okay. Then there was a nice GenArt review that uncovered a couple of editorial issues, including one major embarrassment, because we managed to change the ABNF but not reflect the changes in some places where it was used. That is fixed in the current GitHub version. But the one thing that really nobody had thought about yet was, should 10 to 0 have a meaning? We have ranges in CDDL, so we can say a number is between 1 and 5, or 0 and 255, or something like that. But nobody had the idea yet to write 10 to 0. Does that mean anything? If you read the current text carefully, you probably, as a lawyer, you probably come up with meaning it means the same thing as 0 to 10. And we could go with that, or we could say, this really should be ascending. And the reason why something like 10 to 0 might come up in a specification is really because you use generic types, and you have parameters coming into a place that essentially tell you, you don't need that. You need no value at this point at all. So the lowest value would be 10 and the highest value would be 0. So the type is empty. So that's actually a valid thing that comes in when you do generics. It doesn't come when you manually write it, but if you combine information from parameters, that's something that comes in. So that would be an argument for saying there should be no automatic reversing or something like that, but we should say 10 to 0 should be an empty type. But I don't have a strong opinion on either.
You would need to, this is Paul Hoffman, I think you would need to say all descending lists become empty. And
yes.
I don't know if you would say that once towards the beginning of the document, or if you would say it in each place where there are ranges. Fortunately, I think all of our ranges you can describe as ascending or descending, but my first guess, I hadn't thought of this, is I would say at the beginning, say all descending sequences are simply mean, 0, and leave it at that. Not 0, sorry, empty.
Empty. Okay, good. So that actually completes what I wanted to discuss today. There are a few more things that are really just editorial that need to be done. If anybody has an issue that they would like to bring up, now would be a good time. And apart from that, the plan is to submit -06 next Tuesday. I'm still in the plane on Monday, but Tuesday should be possible because it's mostly done. And as we said, the ISG telechat is then the Wednesday in the following week. And then we have the quiet of Thanksgiving to react to the ISG comment, and at some point we can declare May 2018 because that was the milestone for this.
So in version 06, you would include the comments from Jenart, Sector, and Alexei, which has not yet sent, but will.
Yes, and then we will try to elicit something from Kevin and try to include that as well.
Yeah, please post to the list as soon as you can the issue we just discussed about the descending,
Yes.
so that at least if anyone on the list has comments, we get them quickly.
Okay, so talking about CDL, we hope this all will be completed before we meet the next time. So we should start thinking what we actually want to do after it's approved. And as you know, there is a freezer document, CDL freezer, draft IETF something, CDL freezer, that has a number of things we could do. Now, from this meeting, I get the feedback, and particularly from the suit people who are using CDL right now for a spec. The one thing that they would really like to have soon is some import function and some way to avoid name collisions when importing things. So some namespacing mechanism, not namespacing for saying all these types have been defined by Cisco, but namespacing in the sense of where we make sure that something we import doesn't conflict with the types that we define in the specification. So this would be a good time for people to think about this and maybe make some suggestions how the exact shape of this could be. I think it's possible to define something that's functional but not entirely against the spirit of what CDL is so far. So maybe this is a small delta we can deliver relatively quickly. And then, of course, once you can import things, the question is from where do you import things? The Yang people have a Yang module registry, and maybe we can learn something from that. So that's another item I would invite you to think about. How can we make our life easier by making sure when we import something, there's actually a place where that comes from, so that there is no misunderstanding, there are no version conflicts on all these ugly things. And we talked a lot about other things we might be doing at the last IETF. I don't want to repeat that, but I think the namespacing is really something that can be added and would help people quickly.
This is Henk messing with the mic. If you want to import something, you have to have a stable reference, as we just said. And with the Yang modules, it's easy. They have this string identifiers. But CDDL data items are a little bit more ephemeral. You can concatenate them. They can be in memory. They can be in a file. They can basically be everywhere. So we have to agree upon how to reference one. And the first thing that springs to my mind, which might also be in the name type name conflict realm, is just using the root type. So maybe the root type of a document could be an anchor, and then there's the same problem space as the type name conflict, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't inviting you to make this up in this meeting on the fly. Because there are a few things we probably need to identify what our requirements are here and then start filling them in. But indeed, we need a way to specify the inclusion of something in a particular version. And the Yang people have shown one way of doing this, and we may want to learn from that. Whether we classify it as a mistake from which we learn or as something to emulate. Okay, that's all I have on CDDL.
Paul Hoffman, who's shorter than Hank. A quick one on the CDDL, the next steps. I think it would be really good if, as we are starting that, or maybe even just before we do, that there is some outreach to every author of anyone who's written an RFC that uses CDDL and possibly even Cbor. Because remember, some of those precede CDDL enough where they've been saying, gosh, I wish there was a CDDL. As somebody who talks to the authors of something that's now in IETF last call, I think a lot of them just assumed they couldn't touch anything. And giving that, saying, hey, we're looking for input, I think that would be really useful.
I would add Jason to the list and yeah. Very good point. So we now have to find somebody who is responsible for outreach.
I'll take that.
Good, thank you. So Cbor BIS, we have a milestone of October 2018 for that, so we are not quite as late with that as we are with CDDL, but the dates on the slides are all wrong, sorry. Just a quick reminder what this is about. Again, these are the slides I have every time. We are trying to take Cbor to internet standard, which means we are not trying to do a second system syndrome on Cbor here. We are really trying to fix the RETA and other issues that really are impacting interoperability. Yeah, there's even a process that is defined in RFC 6410. So if you haven't read that, you should read it. And one interesting observation is the number of implementations is still growing. This slide is already a couple of months old. I don't know if we have 55 now. Actually, there are now implementations that are on the Wikipedia page that are not on this thing, and vice versa. So I probably have to integrate them again at some point in time. So we have lots of things to look at for interoperability. So on the document, there has been a rapid fire sequence of versions 03 and 04. Version 03 mainly has a large number of editorial changes that follow from using Jeffrey's suggestion to introduce the term argument. Fortunately, we didn't have any argument about that. For the value that results from the additional information field, the 5-bit additional information field, and possibly any 1 to 4 or 8 bytes following that. Most implementations do that. I mean, they look at the first byte, generate the argument, and then branch out into major types. So for an implementer, that's a very natural way to think about this. And so it's probably also a good idea to describe it this way. But it, of course, meant a lot of places could be simplified by simply talking about the argument instead of repeating the whole thing again. There were other editorial changes, including removing a duplicate section that somehow had crept in. And there was one pull request that we accepted that said an application must not rely on ordering of items in a map. So this is somewhat special because we are not really telling the application a lot of other things, but we are saying, hey, really, you must not rely on the ordering of items in the map. And that's probably because there is an attractive nuisance here, and we have to warn people about this in no uncertain terms. I will come back to this in a couple of slides because there is an editorial problem with that. But first of all, I think it is okay to have this special warning in there. So that was 03. 04 had a few more editorial fixes. So there is text that explains how the 0b, 0x notation for byte strings is actually supposed to be read. In C, the text starts with the quick note that any number notation and so on we are using is like C. But in C, when you write 0b or 0x something, that's a number. And we actually use it to stand for a byte string. So it required some additional text to say that. Unbelievably, we didn't have a formal reference for IEEE 754 in 7049. I have no idea how that has happened, but yeah, so that's in there now. The appendix that listed a number of other formats, including a very old RFC that is almost premonition of what Cbor became. That lists, among others, a format called UB-JSON. And we got an errata at some point that said, all the strings you have in there are wrong. And it turns out what was UB-JSON in 2013 is not what UB-JSON is in 2018. So they completely changed the encoding, and probably the best way to handle this is to just get rid of that particular example, because we are not in the business of tracking that particular specification and changing things again when that changes. Yeah, more importantly, there is now text. Given that we have introduced the data model as a way to talk about what the Cbor data actually mean, we now make it very explicit that the representation variants are not visible at the data model level. And this meshes with the previous slide where we say an application must not use the map ordering. This essentially says the data model that is delivered to an application does not represent whether the number 1 is represented by a 1 byte or a 2 byte representation. Very few people who have used Cbor actually got this wrong, so that's why we didn't feel an urgent reason to put it in. But with the same discussion coming up in CDDL, it probably was a good idea to put it here as well. Tag 1, the POSIX time, the epoch-based time, we threw this in a little bit lazily in 7049 because we were confident that implementers would get this right, and implementers did get this right. Maybe it's a good idea to spend a little bit more effort there. So most people who use POSIX times use them for identifying times and dates that are in our era, so that are after 1970. And POSIX doesn't define how you do, for instance, my birthday. I cannot represent my birthday in tag 1 as defined in 7049. And the new text does acknowledge the fact that the original text did allow negative numbers, but says if you want to do that, your application has to define how to interpret this, because there's no single standard way of interpreting negative POSIX times. Now, one problem with writing a little bit more text about time is that everything you ever say about leap seconds is always misinterpreted by half of the people. So one half of the people thinks leap seconds are ignored by POSIX, and the other half thinks leap seconds are specially treated by POSIX, and both is true, depending on what you exactly mean with that statement. Yeah, there is something about leap seconds and POSIX time, we all know that, and the document to read up about this is POSIX, not our document. So we want to minimize the exposure we have to this problem. So we may want to delete a little bit of text again. I don't know. So that is still ongoing in issue number 35. Yeah, I wish somebody would finish the work that Joe Touch has done with the time document, but that doesn't seem to go forward, so I don't know. Yeah.
35 is closed.
Yes. Use the microphone.
So issue 35 is closed. So is there still ongoing discussion, or?
There is still ongoing discussion.
Okay.
Well, the issue was negative values are not defined. We have fixed that, but the text that is now in there isn't quite right. So that's why there is ongoing discussion.
Okay. So it's not under any particular issue. It's just an open kind of a. We're not binding it to a particular issue.
No, it just happens in this issue because this issue changed the text and it now has all these exposures that we didn't have before.
Okay. And the issue also mentioned NaN and infinity for dates.
Right.
Was that? I don't know that that's been dealt with yet.
It hasn't.
Okay.
Do we have to?
I don't know. I haven't really. I don't have an informed opinion yet. But no, I don't know. Maybe.
So what exactly does it mean to have a date infinity? Actually, there's one application where that is actually used in X509 certificates. If you want to say this certificate doesn't expire soon, because you have to give an expiration date, you do something like, what is it, 9,999? Or there's a conventional way of saying there is no expiration date on this certificate. Now, of course, my recommendation would be to make the date optional in that case and say there is no expiration date. But some warped minds might want to use plus infinity in places like that. Yeah, so we could disallow it, we could be mute on it. I think most people here don't care about that.
This is Hank, just not to leave the room without any opinion. Just don't do it. Infinity can be just an omission or a non-value, like empty or something. I don't think there's any foreseeable use for it.
Yeah. So maybe the one editorial note that I can take is that the current text that says, if you use a negative number, you're on your own. I could change that and say, if you don't use a zero or positive number, you're on your own. And then we have that covered.
This is Chris Lemons. Actually, positive and negative infinities do have a number of various uses, including in time fields. They have some good properties when you're doing math with them. If I want to say, compare values with them, values compare nicely to positive and negative infinity using the standard floating point rules. So while the uses may be niche, I wouldn't necessarily rule them out entirely. And
Yeah, so
they're there so people will absolutely use them.
The application could always define what it means, but
Absolutely.
we are not doing that.
Yeah. My first reaction is infinity seems useful and a good thing, and less code.
Okay, good. The final change on this slide in Dash 04 was specifying the preferred serialization. Actually, the preferred serialization had always been in there, except that it didn't use the term. So it now has a subsection that talks about preferred serialization. And the short version of the rule is you always use the shortest variant. And you can then make this a little bit longer when talking about floating point, but it's still essentially the same thing. You always use the shortest variant. And I think that's a neat rule that implementers can understand. And it's called preferred because it's not the only one. The burden is not on the encoder to always hit the preferred serialization, and the burden is not on the decoder to somehow reject serializations that are not preferred. So that's the interesting choice we have made here. Map key equivalence was going to bite us back at some point. And I think now that we are talking about generic data models and data models of applications, we actually can be a little bit more specific here. And first of all, say that map key equivalence is up to the application. So when in an application, a floating point number and an integer number are the same thing, you shouldn't use them both at the same time in a map. To enable generic tools, we also have to define a base equivalence at the basic generic data model level. And basically, if you want to use generic encoders and decoders, application definitions can only be more restrictive. So the total set of maps that you are allowed to write has the maximum size in the generic model, and then in the application model, you are identifying some of them onto each other. So you have fewer possible values for a map type. I try to write up a minimally, this should say minimally restrictive definition. And that's mostly obvious, except for one thing. I have gotten a lot of feedback from implementers that they don't want to have floating point 0.0 both in positive and negative form as map keys. Now, unless you actually work with floating point, it's really hard to understand what the consequences of one or the other are. But it turns out people really have a problem when that happens. So that's the one exception where the definition right now is not minimally restrictive. The minimally restrictive definition would say, of course, you can have +0 and -0 as different map keys. But that's something that implementers really have problems with. So the current definition excludes that. So it's a small word. And yeah, if people think there are valid applications where we have to have both +0.0 and -0.0, the two floating point values as map keys, then we need to know. Okay, so much about map key equivalence. Then let's get to the must not. Section 4 currently editorially is placed as a section that tells writers of protocol specifications how to best make use of Cbor. So it's really not describing interoperability, it's describing what people should be doing in their specifications to get interoperability. So it's a bit weird to have RFC 2119 keywords in that section. And we actually say at the beginning of this section that we are only doing this for May keywords because it's a good thing to point out that some possibilities exist. So the new text about map ordering, that the application must not depend on map ordering, that doesn't quite fit in. So it's in there right now, but it's really not quite at the right place. But it is at the right place semantically because it's really about how should an application make use of maps. So yeah, I'm not quite sure how to handle this. This could be pushed right up into the definition, what major type 5 is, the map type. Or we could keep it here and live with the fact that it is a little bit weird. Or we could put it in both places, the must not in major type 5 and the reminder that this is the case in section 4. I don't have a strong opinion, but at some point we need to decide. One thing that we haven't done yet, but we probably should do soon, is think about how we want to evolve the IANA considerations in Cbor BIS. 7049 was designed to be very friendly to specification required. So with a specification in hand, you actually get very good numbers. So Cbor has bad numbers and good numbers. And to get a good number, you essentially need to come with a specification. And that maybe was fine for the first 5 years. Or I'm convinced it actually was fine for the first 5 years. But maybe this is the time to reconsider and think, does it need to be a bit harder to exhaust the spaces? And in particular, talking about the 1+1 byte spaces, where you have 1 byte of type and additional information plus 1 additional byte. So everything that goes from 0 to 255, we may want to apply a little bit more conservation. So strangely, RFC 8226 doesn't have a category called specification required plus some good reason. When it talks about expert review, it actually tells you you can instruct the expert to do certain things. When it talks about specification required, it says this is like expert review plus. But this is maybe a fine point that is lost. So that would be one way to make this a bit more explicit on how we want the expert to act in this place. You probably have an opinion on that.
Yes, Barry Liba, the author of BCP 26, at least the current version of BCP 26. The intent of specification required is that it is expert review with a specification required, and the expert is supposed to review the specification in addition to anything else you tell the expert. And you can tell the expert whatever you want. If you want to tell the expert to treat this like FCFS with a smell test, that's fine. If you want to tell the expert to treat this like standards action, but slightly more lenient, you can do that. You have a lot of flexibility.
Yep.
So
Okay, so
whatever makes sense.
maybe the answer is to explain that right there, even though it should be in 8226. It's often not understood.
The other thing is, assume when you're writing this instructions to the expert that this is a new expert appointed 15 years from now that's going to read this, who had
Yes.
no context. And yeah, if you want to say you want to avoid depleting certain ranges and that kind of stuff, just lay it all out.
Okay. So we would not go away from specification required, but we would, for the 1+1 space, provide additional instructions to the expert.
Yep.
So the other thing that we could discuss is whether the 1+2 case should go from first come, first served to specification required. We don't really have a big movement to deplete this space yet. So I think we have 10 allocations or something like that. But one reason for that is that IANA only recently realized they had been doing this wrong. So they actually had sent all the FCFS registrations to the expert as well. And given that IANA has now recognized, oh, they don't have to do this, we suddenly
You're going to make them do it.
Pardon me?
You're going to make them do it.
They suddenly got a slew of requests that start getting a bit more redundant and less well fleshed out and so on. So given, we definitely will keep a FCFS range. That makes a lot of sense. We just could put a little incentive for a 1+2 byte tag by saying it's specification required without a lot of additional strings attached to that. And then if you just want to do FCFS, you can always do a 1+4 or even a 1+8 tag.
So do you want to, this is Barry, do you want to change it from what used to be FCFS to specification required
Yes.
or to expert review? I mean, the change is adding two things if you go to specification required, and that's what you want?
That's my view.
Okay.
So my view is that we really benefit from people writing up what they do. And all the exchanges that I have had with people who made submissions have essentially led to them making up their mind in a better way, in a more specific way of what they wanted to do with this. So it's actually a useful thing to have the specification required amended.
Okay.
Okay, if that is the way we want to go forward, then I will draft this. And then, of course, we discuss it and at some point incorporate into the document. Oh, so the next thing is the issues. Can you switch to the GitHub issues? Okay, so maybe we do this LIFO, last in, first out. Clearer rules on simple encoding. I think this is mostly, can you control plus a few times? Maybe one more. Yeah, and can you click, if you go to this pop-up, you get an X and then, yeah, right. So 7049 is, from my point of view, not at all ambiguous about simple values. It tells you don't use the 1+1 representation for where the 1+0 representation works. But people sometimes want to read something there, and so we may want to harden that text a little bit. So I think we don't have a technical disagreement here, but it's just how do we phrase this in such a way that it's not tedious and still has please encode simple values always in the preferred serialization. So we don't allow the 1+1 byte form for the values 0 to 23. Yeah, I don't think we have to discuss this in this room. So we just have to finish the discussion. There's a nice additional comment here below that we probably should be working on our test vectors to have invalid examples. So that's probably a useful thing to do, that we have test vectors that we can feed into implementations to check whether they actually find those invalid instances. Lawrence.
Yeah, so this is Lawrence Lundblade. I thought we had actually added text to address
Yes.
this.
And the issue is that this text is too tedious now.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what I just had on a slide. So the must not in section 4. This is an editorial issue, but no, it's not missing. The title of the section is Self-Describe Cbor, as in act now. Yeah, if people are confused by that, we can change it into self-described Cbor, but there's a reason it is the way it is now. Big nums with zero length byte strings. That is true. We don't specify what the zero length byte string means. We actually don't specify what a one byte string means. So essentially, there is a general rule, and the perception that a zero-length byte string is something special here. Yeah, people can have that perception, so maybe it's worthwhile writing that down. So the underlying reason why nobody has cared about this is that those people who actually have big nums in their implementations usually generate normal integers when the range the integer covers is sufficient, and only when they go beyond the range from minus 18 something, 18 exa something to plus 18, then they do big nums. So they never run into big nums with zero-length byte strings, but of course, if you write a decoder, you have to have code that handles them, so we have to write something up. Lawrence.
Going back to the controversial D, all the other sections in 3.4 are nouns. So it seems like it would line up.
Okay.
So self-described seems to line up better.
Yeah, I'm not a native speaker, so I will always defer to native speakers telling me how to write this. You just said that.
Yeah, so do we want to have a discussion on?
I don't think we need to be updating the issues as we do this.
No. As long as somebody takes notes. Yeah, tag 22. That's something that we have discussed in this room about a year ago. And we were close to essentially saying, let's give up. Because, yeah, it's another bike shed. So Cbor has ways to interact with base 64, base 32, and base 16 or hex encoded data. And it in particular has a way to say, here's a binary string. And if you ever have to convert this into JSON or into another format that doesn't have binary strings, this should be converted to hex, or this should be converted to base 64. And but we didn't say exactly how the base 64 should be generated. And then we found out, yes, people actually had implemented it, and yes, they had implemented it in two different ways. So it is actually possible to generate small pieces of missing interoperability here. When we discussed this the last time, we were a little bit unable to pick a solution, or actually we need to pick two solutions, one for base 64 classic and one for base 64 current, also known as base 64 UL. And maybe the answer for base 64 classic is different than the one for base 64 UL, or maybe it isn't. Yeah, this requires some analysis. I think the right answer here is to do something that hurts people the least. And that requires some analysis to find out where the hurt will be.
Paul Hoffman, I disagree. I don't think we need to specify this. I remember yours and my conversation when we were writing the original spec. Anything for tags that are going to be how to use them, we wanted to be as hand-wavy as possible. We wanted to be a little bit helpful and say, oh, you might think of this. But I do not believe the processing of tag values is meant to be interoperable because of various semantics. And this is a great example. Base 64 can mean lots of things. And quite frankly, there might be future ways of doing base 64. I think we should leave it as just, yeah, you might do this and not aim for interoperability.
Yeah, I think that's a long-standing disagreement between Paul and me, because I think tags are the most important thing that Cbor brings to the table compared to other binary formats. And here's one implementer who needs precision here. And there are a few more out there. And I would like to answer
believe that this implementer has the precision that they need for theirs. What they're asking for is interoperability with somebody else's.
Yes.
And I don't think that if they need that, I don't think anything we can do here would suffice it for them, because he's actually talking about the padding.
Yes.
Remember, some of these specs for base 64 are not clear enough on padding, where, for example, the Python base 64 module actually pads differently, I believe, than some of the C ones. So to me, this is we would not be helping by saying, and here's a way to do that, which we didn't tell you before, and things like that. I agree the tags are great. Expecting interoperability beyond a tag definition means that the semantics have to be perfect, and we suck at that.
Well, and this is Barry. Besides that, as long as consumers can take the input that you output, you have the interoperability you need. It's not required that all outputs be equivalent.
Without taking a position, Chris Lemons again, without taking a position on this particular issue, I'll point out that there are a number of other specifications that build on Cbor and the tags therein. And it's very useful if all of those specifications have common tag definitions that are suitably defined. And certainly all of those specifications can build on and define tags and how they want to use them. But if everybody has the same meanings, then they can share common libraries. Implementers are more likely to get correct answers. In general, certainty is almost always a good thing.
Yeah, so the background for this particular discussion is that tag 22 is actually meant for interoperability with JSON specifications. So if somebody does a JSON specification that says, here's something encoded in base 64, but you are a constraint device and want to deliver JSON to the application in Cbor form and want to instruct the Cbor to JSON converter to create exactly what the JSON thing at the end wants, then you need to have control over this padding issue. And the reason why we just don't go ahead and say, oh, let's have all the tags we need, one with padding, one with broken Python padding, one with broken C padding, one without padding, is that we actually gave this a very compact tag number 22, because we think it's good for a constraint device to be able to ship binary data via a Cbor to JSON converter to a JSON application without spending too many bytes. So the selection of what tag 22 does essentially selects the set of JSON-based protocols you can seamlessly interoperate with using this facility. Again, you can define more tags if you really need different behaviors, but it would be fine to have a baseline behavior that actually works with a good selection of JSON-based protocols. And I think we need to do that research and see who would be hurt most by this. So I don't agree, as an author, I don't agree with the position we took about a year ago, let's take out that tag or something like that. I think we should fix it, and I think we should spend some effort on finding out which fix is the least hurtful one. Okay, if there is no other comment, next.
Maybe we can bring this to the list again. And
Yes,
yeah.
Good point. Yeah, I think we are essentially done, because I'm not sure the old ones are really still alive. Remind me what this was. Oh, yeah, so one question that comes up occasionally is, did we use the right terminology? So for instance, we have unsigned integers and negative integers. We have byte strings and text strings. We don't have binary strings, we have byte strings. We have text strings. We have arrays, not vectors or tuples or anything, arrays. And we have maps, not tables, dictionaries, hashes, and so on. And here's one proposal to revisit that and maybe come up with better terminology. I haven't found anything in this particular issue that I think is sufficiently better than what we have today to actually justify changing terminology. So I think he now segues to something completely different. So can you go back to the first part? Yeah, so there is another thing. Somebody went ahead and defined tag 259, which says this map is actually a map, which is great because for a JavaScript user, it's not clear whether a Cbor map is actually meant to be a JavaScript map or a JavaScript object. And right now, implementations usually have a heuristic that looks at the keys, and if all keys are strings, they generate a JavaScript object, and if one of the keys is not a string, they generate a JavaScript map. But that, of course, is brittle, because if what is supposed to be a map just happens to not have a non-string key, it suddenly turns into an object, and then JavaScript gives you completely different accessors to that object. So your implementation, your application is going to blow up in weird ways. So that's one thing that has happened since Bert made this comment, and I think that was a good part of the comment. But somebody just took an FCFS tag and said 259, this is a map, and actually submitted a specification. So we have a specification for that. Okay, so let's take this as a reminder. If we run into terminology that hurts, now is a good time, most last time, to really fix that.
The one terminology that always got me was the map key, because it gets confused with a cryptographic key. And I think Jose actually went to the trouble to say, we're not going to say map key here, we're going to say label. But that seems manageable, but I don't know if there's anything to do about that, but I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, for COSI that works because they only use map keys as labels. So that they can just use the word label. But if this really is mapping from telephone numbers to addresses or something like that, or from language tags to error messages, then the thing before the colon actually is a key, and it's not a label. But yeah, the word key is overused. I completely agree with that.
This is Henk on the room. Yeah, I think you have a point. Lawrence has a point. But it would, I think, more violate the principle of least surprise if we would call it just a label, because then the application seems to be artificially constrained, I think.
Yeah, the map key can be way more than a label. It can be any Cbor data structure. Okay, can you go to the second half of the issue? Yeah, I think we have covered that. Again, we have covered it in a different way than we thought we would cover it a year ago. So a year ago, we said we are going to surgically remove all that is there about canonicalization. But the consensus on the slightly modified original canonicalization seems to be pretty strong. So we might just go for it. Now, the procedural observation is we are changing something in a document that is supposed to become internet standard now. Fortunately, that part is only advisory. So it's advice to an application developer how to do canonicalization. So unless somebody in the ISG really wants to make trouble here, we should be fine with that. So that's that. Yeah, a little bit more. you wanted to comment on the canonicalization?
Yeah, is this where we have the discussion on canonicalization?
Yes.
Okay. I did post an email on this, but I didn't post an issue. It seems right now we have, in terms of the preferred serialization, we have a section on preferred serialization which says minimum length for, but we basically repeat the same thing in canonicalization. So you have
Yes.
one section and then you have the next section. That seems really awkward and not a good
Yep.
thing, right?
So the answer to that is simply editorial. Strike 2 pages of text and say it's like preferred serialization, except that you also have to.
Okay, so it's like it's not preferred at this point. Using the word, it's not a preference anymore. Now it's a requirement.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but there are additional requirements like map key order. There's
Plus
no
map key order.
preferred map key order, but
Right.
there are now 2, unfortunately, map key orders that you can choose from for the old canonicalization and the new canonicalization.
Right. So I came at this a couple of years after 7049 was completed, and basically trying to design the EAT protocol. And I found the canonicalization section the most confusing one to try and figure out. So, and that led me to this whole thing about preferred encoding and all that. So, and I kept asking the question, like, why? What is really the point of canonicalization? And I still don't feel like I have a good answer for that. It's not for signing. It's not for consistency of the data for signing, except for the one particular little case with COSE. And yeah, people that disagree with, what do they disagree with?
Paul Hoffman, not speaking for the people who disagree, but in every cryptography working group I've ever been in that has not nailed down canonicalization at the beginning, some people say, but we need to know this for this reason. So I would say the reason why we're doing it is because we keep hearing from people that they are disappointed that we didn't do it.
Jim Schott, just as an extension of that, there are a set of people who have decided that they absolutely have to have JSON canonicalization and are planning to try to get it off in Prague.
Okay, so what I guess
Who you don't know, but they do exist.
there's a lot of them. What I understand you saying is canonicalization is important for signing to some people I don't know.
Or signing or signing equivalents. For those people in the room who've been following the DNS auth working group, we have somebody who wants to hash over a zone. And we have a way of doing that, but we rat hole on it every time anyways. Having it well written in the spec will at least give them a specific target and maybe shut them up. But if we don't do it, it's going to come back from somebody who said, I needed this for a reason that I can't describe really well. Given that what we have is okay now, and I actually love the idea of deduplicating, so it's even shorter, I think it's just worth us doing it.
Okay, well, since those people are not here, but
Well, I'm here. I can tell you why I want this.
yeah, let me finish
Yes.
and just suggest just some clarifying text around why canonicalization is used for signing in some cases and is desirable. That would help a lot, right?
No, it's exactly like with a time issue. The more you say about it, the more you confuse.
I think
There are
I
several
would be-
people in this room who have been.
I think I'd be less confused
Have
because I came at this and I felt
Yes.
like why do I spent a lot of time trying to think about why do and canonicalization is expensive, right? Because of the map key ordering issue. And that, can actually add a lot of code or wind up picking up a lot more memory to implement. So it was kind of a big decision to really understand, is that important or not? And the answer came out, for my use case for CWT is canonicalization is not required, right? CWT doesn't say canonicalization is required.
Right.
So maybe that extra text is going to create less confusion. Maybe I'll write a proposal. I guess that would be the thing to do.
So I implemented canonicalization at some point, the old one, the 7049 one, which was extremely simple because I already had preferred serialization. So I really only had to do the map key ordering, which is about 3 lines of code if you do it right. But of course, I also had to write a visitor pattern and all that. So in total, it's like 20 lines of code to do this, but it does require a lot of memory. So that's really the cost. It's not a lot of work to do it, but it has a lot of, you are shuffling around stuff.
Right.
And why I wanted to have it was not for signing, but to have deterministic output. So I could see, is this run of my code producing the same output as the previous one? It's a completely different application, but it's sometimes really useful to be able to do that, for instance, in continuous integration environments. I want to know, has that changed the output? And that's why I would like to get rid of the term canonicalization and call it deterministic encoding, because that's all it is.
Yeah, that's another question then. The map key ordering, is there use for that outside of canonicalization and deterministic encoding? It seems like there might be. So maybe the way to factor it is, here's the preferred serialization, here's the preferred map key ordering, and canonicalization and deterministic encoding is when you do both.
Yeah, I have a hard time imagining a situation where I would want to nail down the map key ordering, but not nail down the other things as well. Because the only reason is that I want to do binary comparisons on the output, and I need to have preferred serialization for that as well.
Well, the ordering matters when you're doing some lookups and when you're doing duplicate detection, right? Right.
Yeah, but
okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, I think we have covered that one as well. Was the fourth one? No. Yeah, I think we just covered that one. Or is there anything in that issue that we haven't covered? It's your issue. I think we did that. Can we close that issue? Okay, so let's remember that we look at issue 21 and see whether it actually can be closed. Test suite. We had one nice comment in that other issue that our test suite should include bad examples. So is there a place in the specification where we would want to have that pointer? If this were a proposed standard, I would be very open for that, but not so sure. Will there be a GitHub in 5 years from now?
Jim Schott, do you have any examples at all in the document?
Yes.
Okay. I'd say put a pointer to the COSI working group and create a project. And if it dies in 15 years, then that's
okay.
fine.
Sounds good. So this cases.js that Joe pointed to here is essentially just the extracted examples from the document. So it's definitely not a test suite. It was not meant for machines to test anything. It was meant for humans to evaluate their knowledge. So at some point, we probably need to put some more time into this. But somebody has already done that. Yeah, I think we are now in 2017 land. Yeah, too bad Jeffrey isn't here.
We've been saying that a lot.
Yes. Can the note taker please take that note?
It's not a to-do item, though.
No.
So should we try to get this with Jeffrey in the minutes?
Yeah, I think we can close this, but we should ask Jeffrey whether that's actually true. Okay. So anything else about Cbor Bis? Oh, there are two pull requests.
The pull
Let's have this.
Yeah.
Yep. So what did I say on April 6th? Okay, that goes into details of the text. Yeah, I'm not sure we can do this on the fly here.
Yeah.
So I think the general idea was to have a review of the tag definitions and see whether they are as airtight as we think we can make them after 5 years of experience. And we have talked about tag 1 already. We have talked about tag 22, and I think there are some other observations here that we need to look at. And the other one, I think, is more of a reject. So I think some of this we actually did in the meantime, but the basic idea of being more explicit of the degree to which some Cbor data is bad is not a good idea. So Cbor data is good or bad, but we shouldn't have 3 different classes of badness. And in particular, we shouldn't place any expectations or requirements on how a decoder is handling bad data, ill-formed data. So I think having the document start to make distinctions here is counterproductive, because it causes people to think they can get away with some of this behavior. And yeah, sorry, this is so old, I haven't looked at it in a while. This is where the argument fix came from, and the rest is now a giant merge conflict. So that's why it's still there. Now I remember what happened here. So the argument part was really useful for getting some of the text to be more crisp.
Okay, so about the rest of the text, do we need to check with Jeffrey if he's happy, or?
So the normal procedure is...
It is always a good idea.
Yes. The normal procedure is when an editor cherry picks something from a pull request, this places an onus on the submitter of the pull request to clean that up and make one or two more new ones that relate to the current version. And this is a little bit unfair, but this is the way we do things on GitHub. And so that's another place where we say, oh, it would be nice if Jeffrey would be here.
Yeah.
Just add a comment to the GitHubs asking whether he is okay with resolution of
Yes.
this. At least, you know, yeah, his assumption might be different. At least it will be explicit.
Yeah, so we need to do that for the tuple request and for the issue as well.
Yes.
And that's it. I think.
Great. Okay, so we are done with Cbor BIS for this meeting. And then there are Cbor tag definitions. Just as a reminder, tags are important and are the best thing since sliced bread and everything. And RFC 7049 predefines 18 tags. That's what we just talked about. We should try to check these. And it's easy to register your own tags, but still there may be a good reason that this working group actually does something about a particular tag proposal. And there are 5 documents on the table right now. 2 of those are in the charter. The OID document is in the charter, but has morphed a little bit away from the charter. And we probably have to revisit that at some point. In particular, now that we are starting to have more Cbor that actually relates to ASN1, that's maybe a good idea. Should we have some nice tags for doing that? But that's work that needs to be done. The array tag I want to talk about today. The time tag, which is a true FCFS tag, where we just went ahead and defined a third time tag. So we now have 0, 1, and 1001. The third time tag was needed for Haskell time. They have a time format that is more precise than what we can represent in tag 1. So maybe at some point we want to take this free-floating FCFS thing and turn it into some form of RFC. But it's not on the charter. One other thing that came in from the LPWAN people was a tag for templates. That's maybe something we just want to observe, whether the LPWAN people make use of that. And then there is the idea of actually sitting down after 5 years and seeing what tags are there that people have registered, and should we maybe give the good ones more recognition, pull in specifications that are now in random places into a common document. So this is, yeah, lots of editorial work, survey work, which we might want to do after being done with Cbor BIS and CDDL 2.0. So let's talk about the array document. That has been around for a long time. I remember having a minion in my hand in Hawaii and talking to a guy about how the array tag was going to solve the specific problems he was having at the time. And it hasn't changed since. It's stable. And yeah, the idea is to have tags for arrays of unsigned integers, signed integers, and floats, which are homogeneous, not only in type, but also in representation. Because we have CPU instructions that are good for working on these things. We have language features that use these things. In particular, in JavaScript, we have lots of language support for these, so it makes sense to interchange them as they are. So this goes ahead and creates this 3x4 array, and it then does the unthinkable and provides both the LSB first and an MSB first version, because people really wanted to have that. They say it's okay to have the occasional single data item and have to recode that, but the arrays were supposed to be just blasted out. And yeah, so we get 24 tags, and this was originally designed to be contiguous tags. So you actually can operate this table algorithmically. You don't have to have a big switch for that. And there is a 25th and a 26th tag in the document that tells you about homogeneous arrays of some other form. So if you have a homogeneous array of byte strings, you can do that too. And provides a way to talk about multi-dimensional arrays, so you can give multiple dimensions. So this is all pretty straightforward, and it got stuck because I thought at the time we should give these things 1+1 byte tags. And there were some people who said, oh, you are using 10% of the space. Shall we do that for this? And of course, we have different perceptions on how important arrays are in our life. So the people who do graphics generally think this is a no-brainer. Other people may think, I will never use an array, so why give up 10% of my 1+1 byte space? So essentially, it's reserving as much as we have reserved in the first 5 years of Cbor. So the current working group draft doesn't take a position. And yeah, we had this discussion about a year ago, and we had two different positions. And I think my perception is that the positions have shifted a little bit, that people might be happier with a 1+1 solution. So maybe it's time, now that it's a working group document, to finally ask the question again. And the specific reason is there is another proposal for array tags, and they have already said that they like the working group document better, but they really like to have the numbers now, please. So are we ready to assign those 1+1 tags now, or do we have to have that discussion again?
No, what? Don't have the discussion again, right?
Of course, as usual, that needs to be validated on the list. But there is one person who has a very strong opinion on this.
Okay. I know we cannot quite see the future, but do you expect lots of other registrations of this kind in the future? Or is it one-off, or is it more like, going to be a typical thing that people will request? Reference to this and use it as an example, why to allocate lots of big blocks.
I think reserving big blocks is a pattern, and people will do that, but not necessarily in this space. Because this is a fundamental data type. I mean, it really fits a large number of applications. And
likely to be one-off.
On this level, it's going to be a one-off. I think so.
Paul Hoffman, I agree that it's unlikely to happen again. And let's face it, in the first 5 years, we've gotten a lot of interest. And this is the first chunky thing that has really come up like this. So I would say if somebody later discovers one as obvious as this that none of us noticed, we might slap ourselves on the forehead and go, oh, we should have thought it. But it seems every month that goes by, that seems less and less likely.
Basically echo the same thing. They've had 5 years to come up with these things. This is the only one we got. It seems like we've had a fair chance to find them.
And even if we find it, we have space for 10 more. So yeah, it's okay. So I think that was my last slide.
So the status of this document is it was just adopted after 2 reviews. We can confirm this in the mailing list, this issue. But after that, I think we should get maybe some more people to read this, and then we can move on with last calls, etc.
So my proposal would be that we have this discussion, then I submit -1 with the result of that discussion. But during the discussion, people can also look at the rest of the document. So we should be able to go to a working blast call from the O1 unless something surprising pops up.
Sean Leonard said something for the mic and then said doesn't need to be mic'd, I suppose, but I'll mic it anyway. I remain convinced that it should be in the 2-byte tag space, 256 to 4096 or whatever is that 2-byte tag space. So.
Thank you. So. Okay, I'm done.
So that was it for the 3 working group documents and the other documents as well. We have 20 minutes left. It's good if you want to discuss anything. Otherwise, we are done.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Early is good. And thank you, Sean, for participating remotely at whatever godforsaken time this is in your zone. Oh, that's not bad at all. 7:41 p.m. says Jim Schott. Okay, that's not bad. Yeah. Thank you nonetheless. Yeah. Well, that can be, I mean, you guys can go do that. Yeah. Sean notes the plenary will be tough, though, time zone wise.
For the record.
Yeah.
So we need to, I think, take some notes as well.
Okay.
We need to start, it's mostly for custom, but. Thank you.
Fresh. What I think I'll do is create a doodle
Yes.
and propose a few times. Yes.
How is the meeting going so far?
Good.
Otherwise?
Same for you.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Intense. Did you have your non-com interview?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I will know when you know. Well, I'll know probably a day before you know. Usually they tell the people who are selected, then they tell the people who weren't selected, and then they announce it publicly, and that's just for a couple of days. But they expect to probably be announced in February. The non-com's supposed to decide by the end of December, and then they have to send